Can freedom explain the hand that rises in anger and strikes another person? Yes, at least in one important sense. The blow belongs to a choosing will. It might have been withheld, and because it might have been withheld, responsibility enters the scene. But the earth does not deliberate before it breaks. A tumor does not weigh mercy against cruelty, and a suffering child may have chosen nothing remotely connected to the pain now imposed upon them. Here then is the governing difficulty. An answer may be powerful where it belongs and merciless when compelled to rule every province of suffering. The appeal of the free will defense is immediate. A world containing genuine love, courage, loyalty, and moral goodness must also contain the possibility of refusal, betrayal, cowardice, and cruelty. If our choices are real, they cannot be real only when they are good. Freedom therefore helps us understand how chosen wrongdoing can exist without treating wrongdoing as good, necessary, or innocent. There is relief in this answer because it preserves both agency and judgment. The wrongdoer truly acts, and the wrong remains truly wrong. Yet relief can harden into haste. An explanation designed for the will that chooses evil is quietly extended to pain in which no choosing will is evident. At that moment, classification is abandoned, and with it moral clarity. Disease is spoken of as though it were assault. Disaster is treated as though nature had formed an intention. The wounded are questioned as though their suffering must reveal some hidden guilt. Mystery is not answered, it is merely covered with certainty. We must therefore divide the territory before attempting to govern it. There is chosen harm, the deliberate act itself. There are consequences of choices, which may travel far beyond the person who chose. There is systemic harm, formed and sustained through many unequal acts across time. There is disease, where bodily suffering may arise without moral intention. And there is disaster, where impersonal forces can devastate lives without choosing whom they touch. These categories may overlap, but they are not interchangeable. The audience interest reflected in E6, E16, and E10, interest in suffering, freedom, innocent children, and Lewis context discussion shows why this inquiry matters to those listening. It does not establish the truth of any philosophical conclusion. Attention is evidence of concern, not proof. And concern must become discipline. If we confuse causes, we may shield the one who struck, accuse the one who was struck, or pretend to know what remains hidden. No explanation deserves acceptance if it secretly transfers responsibility from the powerful to the wounded. We will preserve the force of freedom where freedom has force, admit its partial reach where choices shape later conditions, and refuse to invoke it where it supplies no direct cause. But before we mark those boundaries, we must enter the ground on which the defense is strongest. What would be lost in a world where no will could truly choose, and therefore no will could truly love? What would be lost is not merely the ability to select between alternatives as one selects between two roads or two objects. Freedom, in the morally serious sense, is the power to give oneself or withhold oneself, to keep faith or break it, to defend the vulnerable or exploit them, to receive love or reject it. It is not permission to satisfy every desire. It is the grave capacity by which desire itself may be judged, restrained, obeyed, or refused. If love were automatic, it might resemble love in its outward appearance while lacking its inward meaning. Loyalty that cannot desert is not yet loyalty. Courage without the possibility of retreat is merely motion. Generosity that cannot withhold has never truly given. The dignity of these goods lies partly in the fact that a person could do otherwise. But the shadow follows the substance. The same will that can offer protection can withdraw it. The same power by which one keeps a promise is the power by which another promise is betrayed. Meaningful agency may therefore require not the actuality of wrongdoing, but its possibility. This is the central proposal of the free will defense. It does not say that cruelty is required, as though every wound were a necessary payment placed upon an innocent victim. It says that a world of responsible persons may be incompatible with a world in which every misuse of agency is rendered impossible. The possibility belongs to freedom, The guilt belongs to the will that converts possibility into action. We must also distinguish a defense from a complete explanation. To argue that divine goodness and permitted human freedom can coexist is to answer one kind of objection. It is not to disclose the precise reason one particular act was permitted, why it occurred at that moment, or why intervention did not come before the damage. Logical consistency is not secret knowledge. The defense may show that belief is not contradictory without claiming access to the whole counsel behind an individual tragedy. Nor may permission, commission, and approval be blended into one idea. To permit an agent to act is not to perform the agent's deed. To allow the possibility of betrayal is not to betray. And to permit freedom is certainly not to pronounce every use of freedom good. Cruelty does not acquire innocence because agency has value. Rather, its cruelty becomes morally intelligible because a responsible will has corrupted a valuable power. For the same reason, respect for freedom cannot require passivity. If agency matters, then the agency of the rescuer matters also. We may warn, restrain, protect, judge, and repair. Non-intervention is not a sacred tribute owed to the wrongdoer while the endangered person bears the cost. Freedom gives moral weight both to the choice that threatens and to the choice that stands against it. The defense has therefore achieved something real but limited. It has made chosen evil possible without making it necessary or good. We must now look more closely at the moment when possibility becomes deed, when a human will takes this severe gift and turns it into a weapon. Chosen harm begins where suffering is intentionally inflicted, knowingly enabled, or culpably neglected by a person who possesses meaningful control. Intention is not the only doorway. One may seek another's injury, permit it while having a serious duty and real power to prevent it, or refuse necessary care with sufficient knowledge of what that refusal will do. In each case, agency is not merely present in the background. It is directed, through action or omission, against another person's good. We must speak of this chain without disguising any link. The capacity to choose creates the possibility of offense, but capacity does not commit the offense. The particular agent considers, consents, proceeds, or deliberately refuses to act. Freedom explains how the injury could be chosen. It does not explain away the chooser. The general permission of agency and the particular commission of harm remain distinct, and moral clarity depends upon keeping them distinct. This is also where responsibility must be guarded against its most convenient corruption. The victim's existence did not summon betrayal. Trust did not manufacture deception. Dependence did not create neglect, and vulnerability did not command exploitation. These conditions may provide the wrongdoer with an opportunity, but opportunity is not moral causation. The open door does not become guilty because another person enters with destructive purpose. To shift blame toward the wounded is to grant wrongdoing a second victory, first over their safety and then over the truth. Nor does respect for agency require reverence for everything an agent decides. Restraint may recognize choice precisely by taking its danger seriously. Accountability addresses a person as one whose actions possess meaning. Rescue honors the freedom and worth of the endangered. Prevention declares that another person's liberty is not raw material for the offender's desire. Consequences imposed with justice do not deny moral agency, they answer it. Yet judgment must be exact, not merely severe. Knowledge may be impaired. Coercion may narrow the field of genuine choice. Capacity may be diminished, and unequal power may determine who could foresee, resist, prevent, or safely refuse. These facts can lessen responsibility, redistribute it, or reveal that the apparent agent was also being controlled. But complexity must not become a fog in which all responsibility disappears. We must ask separately what was intended, what was known, what could be controlled, and what duty was neglected. Here, then, the free will defense reaches a genuine success within a definite boundary. It illuminates chosen harm because a human decision stands near the source, but it neither excuses the offense nor transfers guilt to the sufferer. The initiating act has been located. The next question is more difficult. What happens when that act sends pain outward through time and circumstance until its consequences exceed both the wrongdoer's intention and the victim's power to escape them? The decision ends, but its effects do not. What was done in a moment may alter conditions long after the chooser has departed, first touching those nearest the act, then reaching others who neither consented to it nor possessed any power to reverse it. This is the moral asymmetry of consequence. A person may begin what another person must endure, and the burden may continue after the original intention has exhausted itself. Some effects are intended, they belong within the purpose of the deed. Others are not desired but are plainly foreseeable, and the chooser proceeds despite knowing the danger. Still others arise through negligence, where reasonable attention or responsible care might have prevented them. Beyond these lie remote effects that could not have been confidently predicted, effects formed through later decisions, altered circumstances, and the actions of many people. To describe all four as consequences is correct. To assign them all the same degree of guilt is not. We must therefore separate questions that moral haste prefers to combine. What caused this suffering? Who could foresee it? Who possessed the power and duty to prevent it? Who is morally responsible for it? These questions may sometimes point toward the same person, but they need not. A wrongdoer may cause what a victim could not foresee. A witness may foresee what only someone more powerful could prevent. A later person may reduce a harm they did not create. And one who suffers within the chain may be guilty of nothing except being unable to escape it. Causal location, then, is not moral desert. To stand where another choice has placed you is not to have chosen that place. Pain may indeed have a human history without revealing personal guilt in the human being who bears it. This is why the religious reflex that converts suffering into evidence of hidden wrongdoing is not spiritual discernment but moral carelessness. It turns an account of how injury traveled into an accusation against the injured. Consequence is not confession, and suffering is not proof of condemnation. Yet compassion must not be purchased by dissolving responsibility altogether. The answer to indiscriminate blame is not indiscriminate innocence. Judgment must be proportioned to knowledge, freedom, power, duty, and nearness to the preventable harm. Those who intended the result bear one kind of responsibility. Those who knowingly exposed others to it bear another. Those who failed within a genuine duty must answer for that failure. Those without knowledge, control, or meaningful freedom must not be assigned guilt merely because they were present downstream. Freedom can therefore illuminate the beginning of a causal chain, while justice governs its later course with greater precision. Consequences travel farther than culpability. But when repeated choices persist, accumulate, and become ordinary, the chain changes character. What began as action may settle into custom. What custom protects may become structure. And what no living person designed alone may still confine those born within it. Systemic harm begins when injury is sustained not chiefly by one isolated deed, but by an arrangement, by rules that repeatedly favor some and burden others. Habits that conceal unequal treatment, incentives that reward neglect, exclusions that close access, and institutions that preserve these effects beyond any single encounter. No one act contains the whole wrong, yet many lives may be confined by its continuing order. Such an order is seldom created in a single hour. Decisions are repeated, defended, rewarded, and handed onward. What one generation establishes as policy, another receives as ordinary practice. What is ordinary becomes difficult to question, and what is difficult to question acquires the appearance of necessity. Later, people enter an arrangement already distributing power, dependence, opportunity, and risk. They did not begin its history, but neither do they all occupy the same place within it. We must therefore resist the moral laziness of a single collective verdict. The architects who knowingly shaped an injurious system are not identical to the active maintainers who preserve it after recognizing its effects. Passive beneficiaries may receive advantages without having requested them, though knowledge and freedom can alter what continued acceptance requires of them. Constrained participants may cooperate because refusal carries dangers that the secure never face. Resistors may bear costs while attempting repair. Victims may possess neither meaningful influence nor safe escape. These positions can overlap, but they cannot be judged as though causation, benefit, freedom, and guilt were one thing. Here the free will defense has real but partial force. Human agency may explain how the arrangement was formed and why it continues. Persons chose its rules, obeyed its incentives, protected its privileges, ignored its injuries, or refused opportunities to change it. Yet the explanation becomes incomplete when history, inertia, dependence, and unequal power narrow the choices of those now inside. A structure can have human authorship without making every participant an equal author. It can be preserved through present decisions without making every burdened person responsible for the burden. Inherited wrong, therefore, is not automatically inherited guilt, but neither is innocence of origin a permanent exemption from duty. One may truthfully say, "I did not build this," and still be required to ask, "Now that I can see it, what power do I possess within it?" Knowledge can create responsibility where ignorance once limited it. Available power can create obligation where helplessness did not. Repair must remain proportionate, attentive to capacity and consequence, but it must be more than a declaration of personal blamelessness. Freedom thus helps explain both the making and the mending of systemic harm, while refusing to condemn those whom the system confines. But now the human antagonist must be removed altogether. When suffering begins within the body, and no malign choice stands at its source, can freedom still bear the weight placed upon it? It cannot. A disease process does not deliberate before it advances. It does not hate the body it injures, betray a trust, or choose suffering over mercy. Whatever account we finally give of illness, its immediate operation is not the corruption of moral freedom, because no moral agent stands within that operation making a decision. An argument about the misuse of agency cannot, by itself, explain a cause that possesses no agency. Human choices may nevertheless enter around disease. Negligence may increase exposure, exploitation may place some persons at greater risk, and necessary care may be withheld by those who know its importance and possess the power to provide it. Such choices must be judged as choices. They can aggravate illness, deepen its consequences, or determine who receives protection and who is abandoned. But they do not explain disease as a whole. To identify a culpable failure in care is not to prove that every bodily affliction began in a culpable will. At this boundary, another proposal must enter openly. One may argue that embodied life requires a stable natural order. Bodies must operate through regular processes. Actions must have dependable effects, and a world capable of sustaining living creatures may also render them vulnerable to breakdown. This is not the free will defense extended. It is a distinct argument concerning embodiment, regularity, and the conditions of creaturely existence, and it must answer for itself. Nor should it be accepted merely because it offers a conceivable connection between order and vulnerability. We must still ask whether dependable natural processes require this degree of suffering, this distribution of suffering, or this intensity of suffering. Perhaps some vulnerability accompanies an embodied world. It does not follow without further argument that every particular agony is necessary, or that no gentler order was possible. Quote, "End of fray, end of fray, end of fray, end of fray, end of fray." To establish compatibility is not to disclose the reason for each case. The same discipline applies to appeals to growth, redemption, or an afterlife. Suffering may sometimes become an occasion for courage, compassion, reconciliation, or hope. Good may be brought from illness, without illness becoming good. Redemption may answer loss, without proving that the loss was deserved. A promised life beyond death may alter the final meaning of suffering, yet it does not transform present pain into evidence of guilt, spiritual failure, or divine rejection. Each proposal carries its own burden. None may borrow authority from freedom while answering a different question. Disease therefore marks a direct limit. Freedom may influence exposure, treatment, neglect, and response, but it does not supply intention to the bodily process itself. We may acknowledge that limit without concluding that all further thought is useless and without rushing toward consolation that silences the sufferer. The honest answer remains unfinished. And as we move from suffering within the body to devastation in the world beyond it, the distinction grows more severe. What can freedom explain when impersonal nature acts without a will at all? The earthquake returns, but now without the human hand beside it. The ground shifts according to no hatred, no ambition, no betrayal. It cannot be accused of cruelty, persuaded to show restraint, tempted into wrongdoing, or forgiven after repentance. These are categories of the will, and the event possesses no will. To speak as though the earth had chosen its victims is to mistake physical causation for moral action. Yet disaster rarely reaches human beings apart from human conditions. Decisions may place communities in greater danger, disregard warnings, weaken preparation, reserve protection for the powerful, or abandon the vulnerable when relief is possible. After the event, choices govern rescue, provision, recovery, and the distribution of loss. Here freedom reappears, not within the natural force, but within the human conduct surrounding it. Such conduct can enlarge suffering or diminish it. It can deserve judgment or honor, but even serious failures do not become the total explanation of the event itself. This distinction is essential because one tragedy may contain several kinds of cause. The natural occurrence may explain why destruction became physically possible. Human arrangements may explain why some were exposed more severely than others. Particular decisions may explain why warnings were ignored or assistance delayed. None of these questions should consume the rest. To identify preventable vulnerability is not to claim that every casualty was preventable, and to identify culpable neglect is certainly not to accuse those who could neither escape nor command protection. The appeal to a stable natural order again offers a limited account. An orderly world allows events to have consistent causes. It permits knowledge, preparation, action, and the ordinary coherence of embodied life. But consistency answers how processes proceed, not why their human cost is permitted. A mechanism may be comprehensible while its meaning remains obscure. To move from this event followed regular causes to, therefore its suffering serves a morally sufficient purpose, is not an explanation, but a leap across an unanswered question. Perhaps a world in which action is possible must possess regularity. Perhaps regularity entails some danger. Even then, we must ask whether dangers of this magnitude, severity, and unequal distribution are necessary, and whether a world gentler in its hazards was impossible. The stable world proposal may show that order and vulnerability can coexist. It is not yet shown that every devastation is required, deserved, or justified. Thus, freedom has no direct power to explain disaster. It can shape preparation, exposure, rescue, and recovery, and for those choices human beings remain accountable. Beyond them stands an unresolved remainder. Why this loss, here, now, and why protection did not precede it? Intellectual honesty may consist in preserving that question without manufacturing an answer. And nowhere does that restraint become more urgent than when the one beneath the ruin is a child. The child brings the argument to judgment. Not because suffering becomes serious only when it is young, and not because innocence should be used as emotional decoration, but because every explanation must survive contact with the person whose pain it claims to interpret. The child is not an inconvenient case to be removed so that a theory may remain undisturbed. The child is a neighbor, and before that neighbor, our reasoning must become more exact, more restrained, and more humane. We must therefore refuse every accusation for which no responsible evidence exists. The child did not choose the falling ruin, summon the disease, attract the injury, or earn abandonment. Nor may we invent a hidden spiritual necessity merely because visible guilt is absent. Such claims do not solve the moral problem. They preserve an explanation by transferring its burden onto one least able to answer it. Any account of suffering that depends upon blaming the innocent has not defended goodness. It has merely relocated the injustice. The language of growth requires equal discipline. Human beings may grow through what wounds them. Patience may deepen, courage may awaken, compassion may gather around anguish, and a life once broken may acquire strength it did not possess before. But what follows an injury does not necessarily disclose why the injury occurred. Transformation afterward is not proof of necessity beforehand. If a child learns courage in pain, courage is good. The pain does not thereby become good. If others learn mercy through the child's need, their mercy deserves honor. The need was not therefore imposed for their education. This is the difference between redemption and approval. To bring good from evil is to resist evil's claim to possess the final word. It is not to declare that evil was secretly good all along. Rescue may redeem consequences without justifying the danger. Reconciliation may answer loss without making the loss desirable. Love may enter the place of injury and alter what comes next, but it cannot travel backward and convert the wound into kindness. Before such suffering, then, our first duty is not to make anguish tidy. It is to protect where protection remains possible, to treat what can be treated, to remain present when repair is incomplete, and to lament without turning lament into accusation. Truthful uncertainty is not indifference. Sometimes it is the refusal to purchase intellectual comfort with another person's dignity. Compassion, in this sense, is not the surrender of reason but one of its moral disciplines. It prevents theory from becoming cruel precisely when theory is most tempted to defend itself. And now, with chosen harm, consequence, system, disease, disaster, and innocent suffering before us, we can assemble the distinctions into a map. Not one answer imposed upon every pain, but each question carried to the boundary where its explanation must stop. Clarity begins when we cease asking suffering to answer before we have asked what kind of suffering stands before us. The categories belong within one moral landscape, but they do not arise from one source, carry one measure of responsibility, or call for one response. A compassionate account must therefore distinguish before it judges. In chosen harm, freedom has its strongest and most direct force. We ask who intended the injury, who understood the danger, who possessed control, and who failed within a genuine duty of care. Here accountability is central because agency stands near the origin. Freedom makes the wrongdoing possible, the responsible will makes it actual. The victim's vulnerability neither causes the choice nor shares its guilt. With consequences, the inquiry widens. We ask how the effects traveled, which were intended, which were foreseeable, which could have been prevented, and which emerged only through later circumstances. Causation may extend far beyond knowledge and control. Therefore, connection to an event does not by itself establish equal responsibility for everything that follows from it. Systemic harm requires a wider view still. We must examine how an arrangement was historically formed, how it is maintained now, how power is distributed, what positions people inherited, and what realistic opportunities for resistance or repair exist. Freedom partially illuminates both construction and continuation, but responsibility remains differentiated. The architect, the knowing maintainer, the constrained participant, the beneficiary seeking reform, and the person confined by the arrangement cannot be morally merged. Disease and disaster mark the direct boundary. Their underlying processes do not choose. Human beings may worsen exposure, neglect preparation, withhold care, delay rescue, or distribute recovery unjustly. Freedom can explain those surrounding failures and summon corresponding accountability. It cannot explain the bodily breakdown or natural event itself as though impersonal processes had committed an offense. Here the defense has no direct explanatory force, and another argument must bear the remaining burden. The method, then, is ordered and repeatable. First, identify the source of the suffering. Then locate whatever agency is actually present. Next, assess what could have been prevented, by whom, and under what conditions. Assign responsibility according to intention, knowledge, power, and duty. Finally, choose the response fitted to the case: restraint against wrongdoing, repair for consequences, reform within systems, treatment amid disease, preparation and relief amid disaster. and protection and presence wherever innocence bears the cost. Only after these questions have been answered should metaphysical claims begin. Otherwise, speculation arrives before care and generalization outruns justice. Freedom strongly explains chosen wrongdoing, partially illuminates consequences and systems, and explains human conduct surrounding disease and disaster without explaining their natural source. Confusion need not survive merely because mystery does. We can know where accountability belongs, where blame must cease, and where explanation remains unfinished. That unfinished remainder now becomes the final question. How should we live, believe, doubt, and speak when moral clarity is possible, but complete metaphysical certainty is not? What character, then, should this map produce in us? Not the pride of those who possess an answer for every wound, and not the paralysis of those who conclude that because some wounds remain unexplained, nothing can be known. An incomplete explanation may still speak truth within its rightful limits. Its honesty is measured not only by what it illuminates, but by where it consents to stop. The verdict is therefore plain. Freedom directly helps us understand chosen harm, because a choosing will stands near the offense. It contributes to our understanding of consequences and systems, where decisions accumulate, effects travel, and responsibility becomes distributed without becoming equal. But freedom does not directly explain disease, disaster, or every innocent pain. It may clarify human failure surrounding them. It does not give intention to what never chose. Reaching this limit does not decide the entire question of God. The insufficiency of one defense is not the collapse of every possible reason for belief, just as the persistence of suffering is not answered merely by announcing belief more loudly. Other arguments may remain. Hope may remain. Trust may remain. Yet continued faith cannot establish what argument has not shown, nor may devotion be used to convert possibility into certainty. Here, we must distinguish mystery from evasion. Mystery is the disciplined confession that a question has been carried as far as present reason can take it. Evasion is something colder. It covers unanswered pain with sacred language, discourages inquiry, and calls indifference reverence. Mystery kneels beside the sufferer, without pretending to read the whole design. Evasion stands at a distance and explains why the sufferer should cease asking. The proper response is therefore proportioned to the source. Where a person chooses injury, wrongdoing must be confronted and the endangered protected. Where effects continue, their course must be interrupted and repair pursued. Where harmful arrangements endure, reform must address both present power and inherited constraint. Where illness appears, treatment and care are required. Where disaster threatens, preparation, rescue, and relief become duties. Where suffering cannot be repaired or explained, accompaniment and lament remain forms of moral faithfulness. None of this requires us to treat non-intervention as virtue. Respect for freedom does not command passivity before cruelty. Acceptance of natural regularity does not excuse preventable exposure. Belief in redemption does not authorize neglect of present pain. Hope proves its seriousness not by making suffering sound necessary, but by refusing to abandon those who bear it. And so we return at last to the striking hand, the broken earth, the diseased body, and the suffering child. They do not present one accusation requiring one reply. The hand calls for accountability. The earth calls for preparation and aid. The body calls for treatment and tenderness. The child calls first for protection, presence, and speech cleansed of blame. Perhaps mature faith begins here. Protecting freedom without worshipping it, preserving hope without manufactured certainty, and allowing compassion to govern what we say when explanation has ended. We may speak firmly where truth is available, quietly where it is not, and remain beside one another in the silence.